Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Just a couple of things for housekeeping before we get started, just so that as someone who struggles with multitasking, so I can be as focused as possible. I would love for this point, we'll do a little Q&A towards the end, but I would love for this point if you could mute yourself, bottom left, you see video and mute. If you could both turn off your video and make sure you're muted for now, that would be great. And then later on, when we come to the end of the lecture portion, whatever that means, and we open it up for questions, then we'll have the opportunity for people to take a moment just to show their face and ask their questions or add their comments. So just seeing if we are on Facebook. Don't know if we are. That'll be up to Dawn. So really appreciate you coming and joining me for another session of Talmud Tales today. Today, I want to focus on a story that I think is very appropriate given our time and where we're all living right now. But before we even get to that, I think, Dawn, you have to allow me to do screen sharing, please.
You genius.
Marvin, can you make sure you're muted, please? Thank you. We're going to try and get all of this. So all the mute, just a reminder to people who are on the Zoom, bottom left of your screen, there's a mute button and there's a stop video button. If you could make sure that you are muted and that you stop your video for now, that would be great. And then at the end, we'll take some questions. So let's start with the blessing for the studying of Torah. You can join together with me. As you're muted, you can say it out loud to yourself. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay. Today, we are going to look at a story from the Talmud from Tractate Shabbat. Now, if you can go to our website and go to wbtla.org/WBT at home, and you will find there, if you scroll down the page a little, you'll see on the right-hand side, Talmud Tales Session 2. And if you click on that, and a little accordion is going to open up, and you will see the text that we're going to look at. That way you can have it on your screen, though I'm also going to share my screen as I'm reading the story so that you can follow along with me. But that way you can download that story. I want to remind you that this is just a basic look at this story, and all the stories that we're going to look at together week after week is really just the beginning of what can be a very deep dive into all of these stories. And many of these stories have relevance throughout the year. And for me, I'm trying to look at these stories just in the context of what we're experiencing as a society right now. So you can also find a lot of other ways to read these. But you can always save them, download them to your computer and keep them for another time, or spend some time this Shabbat studying last week's and this week's story and bringing in your own interpretations of that. Okay, so let's get started. And then, like I said, at the end, we'll take some questions and some comments. But let's get started with the story itself. We can get rid of this one now. And now let's look at Talmud Tales, Session 2, The Cave. As you can see here, it is from Babylonian Talmud, Shabbat 33b. I'm going to read it through once, and then we're going to go back and break it down piece by piece. Okay, that's the way that I study Talmud, and I like to study these stories, is first to read through them straight, and then to go back and break it down. Okay, I'll read it out loud, just like story time. Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai were sitting, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gerim was sitting beside them. Rabbi Yehuda opened and said, "How pleasant are the acts of this Roman nation. They established markets, they established bathhouses, they established bridges." Rabbi Yossi was silent. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai answered and said, "Everything they established only for their own needs. They established markets to place prostitutes there, bathhouses to pamper themselves, bridges to take tolls." Yehuda ben Gerim went and retold their words, and it became known to the Roman government. They said, Yehuda, who extolled, let him be extolled. Yossi, who was silent, let him be exiled to Tzipori. Shimon, who disparaged, let him be killed. He, Rabbi Shimon, went with his son and hid in the Beit Midrash. Each day his wife brought him bread and a jug of water, and they ate. When the decree became more severe, he said to his son, women are easy-minded. They may abuse her, and she will reveal us. They went and hid in a cave. A miracle happened. A carob tree and a spring of water were created for them. They took off their clothes and sat up to their necks in sand. All day they sat and studied. And when the time came to pray, they got out of the sand, dressed their bodies, covered their heads, and prayed, and again took off their clothes, all in order that they not wear out. They dwelled in a cave for 12 years. Elijah came to the opening of the cave, saying, who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and the decree is annulled? They went out. They saw men plowing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon said, they forsake eternal life and busy themselves with temporal life. Every place they turned their eyes to was immediately burned. A heavenly voice came out and said to them, did you go out to destroy my world? Return to your cave. And they returned. They dwelled for 12 months, saying, the sentence of the wicked in hell is 12 months. A heavenly voice went out and said, go out from your cave. They went out. Wherever his son, Rabbi Elazar, smote, Rabbi Shimon healed. He said, my son, you and I are sufficient for the world. When the eve of the Sabbath arrived, they saw a certain old man who was holding 2 bunches of myrtle running at twilight. They said to him, why do you need these? He said to them, to honor the Sabbath. They said, would not one suffice for you? He said, one for remember the Sabbath and one for observe the Sabbath. Rabbi Shimon said to him, his son, see how dear is a commandment to Israel? Rabbi Elazar's mind was set at ease. Okay, that's our story. So now we're going to go back, as I said, and we're going to break it down again, piece by piece. Those who joined as I was reading the story, just a reminder, we're asking everyone to, in your bottom left corner of your Zoom, you will see a mute button and a stop video. And I would love for you to both mute and stop your video for now. And then at the end, we'll take a couple of questions and comments from people. Okay, so we're going to look at the story. Most of the time is going to be probably me sharing my screen so that we can break this down piece by piece. And I want you to be thinking, as with every Talmud story, what's happening here? And more important, how is this relevant to what's going on in our world today? And what can I learn from this? Okay? So I'm going to go back to sharing the screen so we can go back to the beginning of the story and start breaking it down a little more. Okay. We have 3 rabbis who are hanging out with another man named Yehuda sitting with them. Now, these were famous rabbis from the 2nd century CE. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the real star of our story, he was a disciple of Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva. And he, according to some, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was the author of the Zohar, according to some of the Kabbalists, the real quintessential text of Kabbalah. So he plays a very significant role, a very important character. So they are sitting there, and Rabbi Yehuda opens up and he says, look how amazing this Roman nation. I want you to remember that the Romans were now were in charge of what was happening in Jerusalem at the time. Okay, so this is now Rabbi Yehuda saying, look, we should be so thankful for what the Romans have created here. They established markets, they established bathhouses, they established bridges, all these amazing things that the Roman government brought. Because if you think about it, back then, the Romans were pretty sophisticated in how they were able to create a society. Rabbi Yossi, the second rabbi, was silent. He didn't say anything. And then Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he said, everything they established, they did it for their own needs, right? They only established the markets to place prostitutes there. And they only made the bathhouses so that they could pamper themselves, and the bridges to take tolls, right? A very cynical approach. In his mind, everything that was taking place was happening purely for self-indulgence. Okay, we can imagine even in today's political world that there are many people out there, including some of us maybe, who look at what the government is doing, who basically look at anything anyone is doing and can have a very negative, pessimistic view about what their intention is. Now, that's a conversation that goes well beyond my pay grade in terms of the political nature and how we've gotten to this point. But all of us can understand that there is a lack of trust that exists in our society. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is really tapping into that. He's tapping into the fact that so many of us have the inclination to see the pessimistic side of what the government is doing or what individuals are doing. Okay, and this is not me being political about our system. I'm just relating it to the story and the fact that this is a pretty understandable approach, especially for a Jewish community that is being overseen by another government, right? The kind of putting the pressure on the Jews. All right, so Yehuda ben Gerim, this guy who was sitting with them, he's the snitch of the group. He goes off and he goes and tells the Roman government about these three rabbis sitting around and schmoozing, and he tells them exactly what was happening. And so the Roman government says, well, that Rabbi Yehuda who said nice things about us, let's give him credit. Maybe we'll give him a nice house. Yossi, who is silent, you know what? Silence isn't so great for us either. So let's send him to Tzipori. Tzipori was a northern city in Israel, in the Galilee, kind of seen as this in the lower Galilee, really the ornament of the Galilee at the time. Really beautiful place. If you go there now, there's some beautiful mosaics, floor mosaics that you can still see from that same period in that city. Okay, so Yossi, he's exiled, and Shimon, the guy who talked back up to us, time for him to be killed. So Rabbi Shimon and his son, they go and they hide in the school to make sure that that the Roman government doesn't find them. And each day his wife brings him water and bread. But when this decree becomes more severe, you can imagine first they say, well, this guy needs to be killed. And then they start putting out, a reward for his head, whatever it may be. He says, well, you never know what's going to happen. If they capture my wife, they may do terrible things to her, and then she will reveal where we are. And so we shouldn't put her in harm's way. You could probably read that a few different ways. Women are easy-minded, probably definitely not a PC way of expressing the role of women. But I think what the point here is that this is about, we don't want to put her in harm's way, so we need to find a new hiding place. Okay, now we get to the cave. And this is why I wanted us to talk about this story, this idea of the cave, because like many of you, I assume we're in this place right now where we're feeling like we are trapped in a cave. We are in our own homes, and there's not many places for us to go. The cave has played a very important role in at least Greek philosophy. And even if you think about Plato, Plato has a very famous allegory about the cave. I just want to show you really quickly the picture of Plato's cave. This is the one that is known, pretty well known. If you want to look it up, you can look up the allegory of the cave. But the idea here is that there are people who are trapped or who are prisoners, and they are facing a wall, and they can only see the wall. And there is a fire behind them, and there are people here who come and have puppets, and because of the fire being here, all of the puppets are shown as shadows on the wall. But these prisoners who are there always don't see what's behind them. They only see the shadows on the wall, right? And it's a whole allegory about the fact that what we think we perceive is actually not reality, right? Because if they were to turn around and these people were to be freed from their enslavement and they turned around, they would be very confused about what is real and what is not real. Okay, so this is just an example to show that this idea of a cave has been central, not just in Jewish tradition, but throughout time and throughout history, and especially though for Jews, the cave has represented a place of deep spiritual awareness and mystical awareness and mystical truths revealed in caves. So there's a lot of significance to a cave, and right now, us being in the cave, I want us to think about how are we taking advantage of this cave that we are now stuck in. Okay, so we'll get more into that as we read through. All right, so they went and hid in a cave. A miracle happened. A carob tree and a spring of water were created for them. And they took off their clothes and they sat up to their necks in sand. And all day they sat and studied. And when the time came to pray, they got out of the sand, dressed their bodies, covered their heads, and prayed, and again took off their clothes, all in order that they not wear out. And they dwelled in the cave for 12 years. Now, God willing, we are not going to be stuck like this for 12 years, but you get the sense that they were stuck there for a long time. Now, a couple things. Number one, the miracle was that they had sustenance while they were in that cave, but their sustenance was not just physical, right? For us, a lot of us are worried about making sure we can get enough food, right? There are plenty of people actually who really are struggling to get food. But the fear of going to the market and the hoarding that has taken place around this country. But the fact is there is physical sustenance that we are having to think about in new ways in this new era. But there's also a mental and spiritual sustenance that's really important. And here we see from this rabbi and his son that their time in that cave was spent really trying to understand the world and understand themselves. So this, again, I think is a reminder that as we are stuck in this space, in our own caves, what are you doing with your time, right? How are you spending your time? And I think, because I'm already starting to feel it, and I know others have too. And if you go on Facebook, I saw one thing today where a guy said, "I've never worked less in my life and felt so tired." Right? There are so many ways in which we feel exhausted, even though we're staying in our homes. Right? There is a tendency, and I think it's going to get harder as the weeks go on, and especially probably as the surges occur in terms of illness. There is going to be a malaise that is probably going to take us over individually and collectively. And so the reason I'm bringing this story today is because I think it's time for us to prepare ourselves for that. And not in a scary, bleak way, but really, how are you doing the work now to prepare yourself for, we know at least it's going to be another few weeks that we're going to be in our homes, minimum. Right? Easter is out of the question. Sorry, Trump. So we need to understand that we have to be sustaining ourselves and finding sustenance, not just that physical sustenance, but how are we going to improve our souls and our emotional well-being, right? So they spend a lot of time doing this, 12 years, this rabbi and his son, focusing on this in the cave. And they dwelled in the cave for 12 years. Elijah came to the opening of the cave, saying, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor died and the decree is annulled?" And they went out. So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, who we are going to welcome to our Seder tables in a few weeks, and probably have virtual Seders. We were just talking at our clergy meeting today about the variety of offerings that we want to offer the Wilshire Boulevard Temple community, live Seders that are going to be happening so families can join together with us, pre-recorded clips of either interpretations of various sections of the Seder itself or some of the prayers and songs, trying to give as many different opportunities for people to engage in a Passover Seder from their own home. Some people are going to be able to do that virtually with their families in other places. Some people are living at home alone and deserve to have a Seder experience virtually with other people as well. I think this is an opportunity for us to think, especially moving forward as a society, even when we are out of this quarantine. How do we make sure that there is less isolation that occurs? Now that we are all becoming so adept at virtual communication, virtual community building, I think it is more incumbent on institutions to make sure that we are providing opportunities for people not to feel isolated, because now there really is no excuse. Now we're all learning how to do it. So I hope you hold us to that task at Wilshire, but I also hope that you hold yourself accountable in terms of the ways in which you can make sure that you are connecting to people who are isolated. Okay, back to the story. So Jewish to go off in tangents, very rabbinic. All right, so Elijah comes and said, "Guess what, Bar Yochai? The decree is gone. The emperor has died. You're free to go." So they come out of their cave, and what happens? They saw men plowing and sowing. Rabbi Shimon said, "They forsake eternal life and busy themselves with temporal life." Okay, They come out of the cave after 12 years. And I think this is important because eventually we are going to be coming out of our caves. And what is the response we are going to have when we reemerge individually, as a family, as a society? And I know it's too early to tell what that's going to be like, and we don't know how long this is going to last. But like I said before, I don't think it's ever too early for us to prepare for that reemergence, because reemerging is going to be significant, right? That's going to determine a lot of how we understand our role in the greater community. Are people going to be fearful of one another? Are they going to be scared? In the case of Rabbi Shimon, he comes out and he says, basically, I've just spent 12 years thinking about mystical things like the spiritual cosmos. I have been so entrenched, literally, in my cave and my own world. How can these people who are busying themselves with temporal life, in other words, plowing the fields, going about their daily task, how can they be focusing on that? How can they just go back to life as normal? Or in this case, they've continued their life as normal while he has had his own experience. And what happens is that every place that they turn their eyes, Rabbi Shimon and his son, everything is destroyed, right? When we come out of this, how do we make sure that we're not coming out with the intention of destroying what's around us? How do we make sure that that built up anxiety and fear and potential rage and anger, whatever we may be feeling, because it's going to be a mix of emotions, how do we make sure that when we come out, we are not trying to burn the place down? How do we make sure we don't do that? Because in this, I think, is the real testament to this idea that when you reemerge from something, whatever it may be, you have the power to build or you have the power to destroy, right? And in this case, Rabbi Shimon decides to destroy what he sees. And a heavenly voice, a bat kol, this heavenly voice comes up in a few places, by the way, in our tradition, came out and said to them, "Did you go out to destroy my world? Return to your cave." And so they returned to their cave, right? They were told, it is not okay for you to come out into the world with this approach. So they returned. And they dwelled for another 12 months, saying, "The sentence of the wicked in hell is 12 months. And a heavenly voice went out and said, "Go out from your cave." So after one more year of them sitting in this cave, they finally get to come out. And they do things a little differently. They went out. Wherever his son, Rabbi Elazar, smote, Rabbi Shimon healed. He said, "My son, you and I are sufficient for the world." Right now, actually, his son comes out and still has some anger, whereas before it was the father who had some of that anger. And now, whenever one of them went to try and destroy, the other one went to heal, right? So there are going to be people and there are going to be instances where we feel that need to destroy or to be angry or to lash out. And how do we make sure that we have a partner, we have a friend, we have someone who is there to help us heal, but also to help make sure that there are enough of us out there healing the world as we continue to deal with this. All right. And then, "My son, you and I are sufficient for the world." Like, know that you are a sufficient person. Okay. When the eve of the Sabbath arrived, their first Shabbat out, they saw a certain old man who was holding 2 bunches of myrtle running at twilight. They said to him, "Why do you need these?" He said to them, "To honor the Sabbath." They said, "Would not one suffice for you?" He said, "One for remember the Sabbath and one for observe the Sabbath." And Rabbi Shimon said to him, "See how dear is a commandment to Israel." And Rabbi Elazar's mind was set at ease. On the eve of Shabbat, they see a man walking down the street. He's getting ready for Shabbat. And they say, why do you need 2 bunches of myrtle? Right? We can imagine this myrtle is to make a joy in the beauty of Shabbat. Like, why do you need 2? Why not 1? And he says his response is a reference to the 2 commandments, the 2 times that the 10 commandments are said in the Torah, in both the book of Exodus and in the book of Deuteronomy. There's an actual difference, right? And every week on Friday night at Lechadodi, we are reminded of the difference between the commandment to honor Shabbat and to remember Shabbat and to observe or to keep Shabbat. right? They're different in the two versions. And so this man says, well, I want to make sure I'm upholding the true essence of Shabbat. So I'm not going to just do one. I'm going to have both of these to make sure that I'm really covering my bases. And Rabbi Shimon turns to his son. This is his son who at the time, as they came out of the cave the second time, was going out and trying to smite things, and says, see, even in this world, there are people doing incredible things and upholding mitzvot, like finding the beauty in this world. And so his son's mind was set at ease. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now. That's the story. I think it's so easy for us to see the hell of the world out there, right? To see this as a time where we can look outside our window and we can really think about what's all the pain and all the chaos that is occurring. And we have the anxiety of what potentially is still to come. And I think, as the end of the story points out, there is such an important element, even while we are still in our caves, to start to realize all the incredible things people are doing out there to care for one another. Because I think that's a key piece of the preparation for when we come out of this cave. In the story, they are able to come out of the cave and then see the good things that people are doing. They start to see the beauty of the world around them. They start to see that people are innately good potentially and are willing to put their best foot forward. They are willing to go the extra mile, not just to go through the motions of living or to celebrate Shabbat in this case, but to really put an extra effort, an extra emphasis on bringing joy and beauty to the world. But even now, I mean, even yesterday, I started to notice in the news, now they're starting to do more segments about the good that's being done out there. I did a wedding a few weeks ago, right before this all went down, right when people were told they could gather with just 10 people and no more. And I got an email a few days ago from the sister of the groom, and she said, we have all of these kippot that we were going to be using for this huge wedding, and we can't put them to use. What do you think about us using them to make masks? And I thought, wow, what an incredible idea. What a beautiful way to use something that otherwise wasn't going to be used at all, but to use it in a new way. So they literally figured out a way to have their kippot that they were going to use for this wedding and use it and tie things around them and to make it so that people could potentially use them as masks. Right? How incredible. There's so many incredible stories out there of people who are working so hard to help one another. This is a story about how are we going to emerge from the cave. We learned from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai that his first run out was really an attempt to bring rage and anger and pessimism to the world, and that was only destructive. But once he had a little bit more time to sit in that cave and reflect on what he could be and what the world could be, then he was able to go out and see that beauty, and he was able to help others who were still caught up in the negativity to be able to change their perspective as well. So I really want you to think about, how are you going to emerge from this cave? We don't know if it's going to be next week. Not going to be next week. It might be a few weeks. It could be as early as a few weeks from now. It could be a few months from now. But now is the time for us to prepare. How are you going about your daily and weekly activities to make sure that you're learning something new, that you are connecting to other people, that you are building up your strength and your muscles of hope and not letting those muscles of pessimism and anxiety and fear rule you, because it's very easy for that to happen. But let's make sure that it doesn't rule us, so that when we do emerge from these caves of ours, that we can emerge more whole, more beautiful, more strengthened, inspired, and have the strength to go out and help those in need and help one another to build a better world. So that's what I take from the story at this time, at this day. This is where I'm at with this interpretation of the story. At this point, I just want to open it up for a few minutes. If someone has either a question or a comment and wants to share something about either another interpretation or a question, I guess the way you would be able to do that, I guess I would ask you just to unmute yourself and say your name and whatever your thought or question is. All right. Anyone? Any thoughts from anyone? No? That's it? Is that incredible of a teaching? Oh, yes. Go ahead.
Okay, this is Abby. And actually,
hi, Abby.
I'm finding that I stay at home a lot because I actually have an immune condition. So this is not something unusual for me, but I do work from home. But so this time is giving me time now to do things that I didn't have a chance to do before. I'm watching YouTubes on art tutorials for my watercolors. I learned how to groom my dog, who's now afraid of me. But I'm not so concerned about staying at home. I'm just concerned about the health of others and myself. You know, that's more on my mind.
What do you mean by the help of others?
Well, you know, I'm a member of another Taurus study, and I just got an email today from the person that we were trying to set up a Zoom and we were trying to get the emails. Well, he has been in ICU for 16 days. His wife had COPD and she got over the virus in 5 days. And he's now in the hospital, and, you know, it's coming, you know, now it's very personal. It's coming close to me. It's not just watching things on television and hearing about it, but this is somebody who I used to sit next to at a tour study all the time, who almost died. And he's lucky because right now the medical system is not overrun. So so that's more of my concern, because I think it is a good time for us to be able to do things and learn more about ourselves and connect more with others, because I feel almost that I can connect more because I have more time to connect because I'm not working. But it's just the concern. I always have a concern about my health, so I'm used to that, but I'm not going out. So it's just a matter of just, you know, even my husband going to the market. I mean, so that's the concerning part for me. That's the harder part for me.
Great. Good. Thank you. That's a really good point. And I think what you're also raising is the reality that, at least for those of us in Los Angeles and other parts of the country too, though some places are a little further ahead in the surge than we are, that this is going to start hitting home a lot more in the coming weeks. And that's why I think it's really important for us we need to worry. We need to, even for those who are feeling good about being at home and they have the time, it's still going to require us to be intuitive and really focused on how can we prepare ourselves for those times where there are people who we may know or even second degree who are struggling with this, and we are pretty limited in what we can do. And I think that is another part of the challenge. I had another question here that was sent to me privately, was what do you think might have happened in that second time in the cave that allowed the fall on his anger? It's a great question. I think one of the things that, in my mind, what must have happened is after his first emergence into the world and recognizing the power he had to destroy, he finally had the power he finally recognized his own power and potential and had time to reflect on, what's the best way to use this? Do I want to destroy the world that I'm about to go out into, or do I want to help build it up again? And I think that time to reflect, and probably maybe his son being there to maybe help him, might have helped in some way. But that's a great question.
May I add to it?
Yeah,
I was going to ask you, when do you think he wrote the Zohar? Assuming he did. I mean, it was attributed to him. Do you think it was in the second time in that 12 months?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe it was a little bit of each. Who knows? Who knows? Yes. I would assume it would be a little bit of both, but that would be my own interpretation.
Yeah, this was just a hypothetical thing.
Yeah. Yep. Great.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions? Yeah.
Rabbi?
Yes. And if you're going to ask a question, it'd be great also so we could see your face. If you're not asking a question, if you could make sure you're muted and your stop video. But if you are asking a question, unmute yourself and unstop your video so we can see your face. Did someone want to ask a question?
I have a question.
Great. Yes.
Me, Valerie. Hi, everybody. Sorry, I had to take a call in the middle, but I hope you didn't answer this already. What was the significance of getting in the sand and out of this, lying in the sand and up to your neck?
Great question. I did not cover that. I did not offer that interpretation. I think on one level, it was, to me, I think it's and there's probably some greater scholars out there who have better interpretations. My initial interpretation is that there is something about truly being embedded in that cave and being vulnerable, right? They were lying there, not clothed, not really protected, yet protected by the earth, and yet put in a very vulnerable place. And that some of the most spiritual moments we have are in times of vulnerability. That this time that we are in this cave could be the opportunity for us to connect with God, to spirituality, to a higher purpose in a way that we couldn't have otherwise done out there in the world during the day-to-day life that we used to live. So this is an opportunity for us to take advantage of being in the cave and see this as an incredible opportunity. So I think that would be my interpretation of the power of being in the earth, grounded, literally grounded in the earth, as an attempt to truly ground ourselves. And this is an opportunity we can really ground ourselves. A lot of people just kind of were floating through life before, and now the grounding can be both very powerful and very scary. There are some people I know whose marriages were already on the rocks and now they're really on the rocks, right? This is not necessarily always going to be a beautiful time for us just to be reflecting without vulnerability and pain. But even with that vulnerability and that pain can be an incredible opportunity for us to unearth and to break open a piece of ourselves that we couldn't otherwise do. So I hope that helps answer.
Another question to jump off Susan Early's question about the time frame. So were these stories written at the same time that the Romans were in Jerusalem, or were they written later, like hundreds of years later? When was the Zohar written?
So the Talmud is basically a conversation among rabbis across generations. So some of these stories were, and most of them were all oral at the time, were written or said and told at various times, sometimes during that period and sometimes later. Yeah. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'll say something. It's Jay, by the way.
Hey Jay, can we see your face?
Yeah, you want me to go on video?
Yeah,
you see me?
I see you. Hello.
Hey, what's going on?
Hey,
so more chiming in about finding kind of diamonds in the rough, more so than the Talmud story. But something that I noticed is that a lot of people are spending way more time with their families and just doing reading, which I think is kind of like sanctifying time every day, which is what Shabbat in and of itself is meant for. And it's kind of like just that's one of the most revolutionary aspects of Judaism, is that it was the first time that time was ever actually sanctified. So I feel that through this, we actually are reconsidering our perspective of time and how valuable it is, especially in who we spend it with. And I guess one more thing I noticed from last week, somebody else pointed this out to me, that last Shabbat in Israel, it was the first time that everything was completely shut down. And it also just so happened that last week's Parsha begun with Moses gathering the Israelites and telling them to observe the Sabbath. So there's all these, whether that's divine or just coincidental, it's just some beautiful things that I kind of found in the last week and a half or so.
Nice. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, and even now we're moving this week. Speaking of Torah portions, we're moving into the book of Leviticus. On Friday at noon, Rabbi Eshel is going to be doing a Torah study on this week's Torah portion. But the book of Leviticus, which we're entering, is about purity, impurity, bodies, how we create holiness amongst impure beings and amongst an impure world. So I think it's also really interesting that we're now moving into a part of the Torah portion in the Torah that's supposed to enlighten us on when you are surrounded by things that are happening to your body and to your home and to the world around you. How do you create a holy world for yourself, right? The holiness code in Leviticus 19 is a whole litany of rules to help us find holiness in our lives. So even though Leviticus gets a bad rap, I think now more than ever would be an incredible time for everyone to delve a little deeper into the book of Leviticus and find the incredible depth that exists in that book. So yeah, thank you, Jay.
Sure.
Any other thoughts or comments? All right.
I
Well,
have,
thank you for, oh yeah.
yeah, just to follow up, I thank Valerie for
That's
that question and for you for explaining that sand business. That really bothered me. However, you did a fantastic explanation of it. And I would just add to all the symbolisms of the earth, of Adam being created from the earth and man being of the earth. And then the womb-like situation of the cave, that they are going back to kind of atavistic beginnings and of rebirth, exiting the cave. But this was fantastic, and I thank you for that Plato diagram. It was really very good, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I love that idea of the rebirth, right? And the womb, right? The womb is like a cave, and that is this rebirth. So thank you. That's a great addition. Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next week for another story. And I wish you all to be well, to find strength and hope and purpose and health in the cave in which you dwell right now. May you find connection, and may you find inspiration and take this opportunity to maybe unearth elements of yourself that otherwise would have been latent. All right, so wishing you all the best and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.